All right, here we go. We are live. And hello, and welcome to the first live stream of the week. So, hello, my dear revolutionaries. It is good to see you, as always. Today we're going to be looking at, as the title suggests, we're going to be looking at a concept which I have really struggled with, to be honest, really tried to grapple or come to terms with. And like, I think it just like kind of this idea goes without saying, which is like, money equals power kind of thing. It's kind of just like this standard, it's like common sense in our age, in the modern world, that like, like if you have enough money, then you enjoy all of the fruits that come with that, all of the luxuries that come with that. But like, money also equals power as a result of that. And like, while this is, like I said, common sense, like I don't think it is as tangible to grasp what that really means as it appears. Like, people obviously make the connection and they're just like, oh, well, obviously money equals power because like people who have a lot of money are also powerful. But like, if you tried to analyze that, you tried to understand, like, why is that? Why is it that people that have a lot of money are also powerful? Because like, you can have a situation with like, let's say what's going on at the moment with Elon Musk. Like, Elon Musk, and for like a lot of lefties and a lot of, communists and like people like that, or general anti-capitalists, like, they've been hating on Elon Musk for a long time now, like before it was cool. But it seems like, in the last couple of months or the last like month or so, it's become cool to hate on Elon Musk. Like, he's dropped out of favor with the general population. Like, if you looked in 2024, he was like the poster child of like the modern era. His name was associated with only good things. He could do no wrong. And now, like, he's lame and people really can't stand him anymore. And so, like, there's someone like that, like Elon Musk, obviously one of the richest people in the world, and like, he has power that comes with that. But like, he could have just stayed in the shadows and be powerful, or he could have had power from great influence, and he's worked on his persona and tried to become powerful as a personality, as a celebrity figure, as well as just having general power. And so, like, power doesn't always come from money. There are different types of power out there. Like, there's adages like, knowledge is power. Or the counter to that from Game of Thrones is power is power. So power actually comes from, being able to order people around and get them to do your bidding. But like, in bourgeois society, in capitalism, in the modern world, money definitely has an element to it that ensures those who are holding money have social power. And like I said, I really want to get to the bottom of this because, like I said, I know it's common sense and I know everybody knows this kind of thing, but like, but what is the mystery behind the common sense? Did you see what I did there? What is the mystery? So look, I have got two viewers, I think, at the moment. Um, Say hello. Oh, buy a newspaper, then set the tone of the message. Squeeb, it's good to see you. Happy New Year, sir. You did duck on last week, and I was having technical issues, and I don't know if you came back or not. But yes, Happy New Year, and welcome to the stream. If you really want power, as Squeeb suggests, buy a newspaper, buy some type of media outlet, and control public opinion. That is power. That is power. And that's definitely related to the adage, knowledge is power. Because, like, if you control what people are thinking, um, you control their opinions on stuff, there's a lot of power that comes with that. And, like, I think, like, in, liberal democratic societies and stuff like that, couldn't rejoin, but Happy New Year, social power. Um, yeah, couldn't rejoin. I don't know what was going on last week. There was a lot of technical issues, but thanks for sticking through. Um, yeah, in like when it comes to like media power and stuff like that in democratic societies, I think media outlets are incredibly important because like in order for you to make an informed decision as a voter, as a player in the democratic system, you need to actually understand what's been going on. And like, who's got the time in the modern era to be across every single policy decision, everything that a politician does, any like the movements of the upper house and the lower house, and like general current affairs. Who's got the time to be across all of that stuff to make you an informed player in a democratic society? And so that's where the media steps in. The media has a responsibility to provide impartial coverage and give us kind of a good representation of what's going on the political landscape, so we can make decisions of quality and of substance in a democratic society. And so yes, the media is incredibly important to the power dynamic. But buying Twitter didn't work for Elon. Well, like it's worked and it hasn't. Like, he's kind of, like I said, if you look at him through a 2024 lens, like he was the liberator of humanity because he was going to bring down cancel culture single-handedly and revive free speech from the clutches of the woke overlords who dominate modern society and modern thought. But like, just like not even a month later, like we're only on the 13th of January, like, 13 days later, and like he isn't faring so well in terms of public opinion as he was just a little while ago. And people are just discovering that he's a bit of a douchebag. Um, which was like apparent, like I said, to probably most lefties, most anti-capitalists. They saw through the Bruce Wayne celebrity veneer that he had crafted through a very curated PR campaign. Putting himself in very particular media spotlights, like, on popular television shows like The Big Bang, or, getting himself on the right as part of the right talking points. And then like very curated selection with like very particular celebrities appearing, even dating like a singer for a while. I think it was Grimes he was going out with for a while. So like he's had a very curated PR campaign over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. And like he's really let loose in the last year in the lead up to the US presidential election. And then he kind of, because he's just totally let loose, it's not curated anymore. There's more content on him out there that he could feasibly manage, even with his extraordinary resources and wealth or monetary power. He can't control all the stuff that's out there, and people have realized and made their own opinions based on all of that content that he's a bit of a douchebag. And so like his power is not in that celebrity sense. Like he's feeling the kind of the flexibility or the malleability of power based on social influence, as opposed to social power based on his money. Like his money hasn't gone anywhere, and his power and influence as a result of him just being able to throw billions and billions of dollars at something hasn't gone anywhere. It's just his popularity that has taken a hit, not his power from his money. So I think he's actually a good example to look at while we have this discussion today. But like, first of all, let's really go back to basics. Like I've said, like I really, really myself like want to get an understanding of what is the actual foundation of this idea that money provides social power. Like, what is it about our society today that like just having more money, like I said, gives you more power? I really want to get to the bottom of that. So like I've been reading, as you would know if you've been on like some of the live streams over the last week, I'm reading Karl Marx's The Grundrisse at the moment. And like, you know, it's an intense read, but Marx dedicates like scores and scores of pages to the concept of money. Okay, so obviously, in a capitalist society, which I will use interchangeably, right, with the idea of bourgeois society. So, capitalist society, bourgeois society, whatever you want to call it. I actually think bourgeois society is a more appropriate term because, like, capitalism kind of denotes this idea of like a perfect free market setting, perfect competitive market environment. But like, it's never like that. It's never that simple. But bourgeois society makes it sound like it is the society of the class of people who are generally of the capitalist class. And like, pull the strings that like make society work and go round. So I don't actually mind describing it as bourgeois society. Anyway, um, he speaks about like kind of the fundamentals of bourgeois society, and like one of the fundamental components of bourgeois society is this idea that like bourgeois society is an exchange society. Okay, so that is not to say that societies that have come before the capitalist mode of production didn't have commerce or something like that. Like there was definitely trade out there. People used money, people exchange things, people produce things. There was industry, there was large scale agriculture. It wasn't everyone just being self sufficient and living like kind of like, with their neighbors in little tiny little communities everywhere. There was a global environment, there was global trade, there was commerce, all of that sort of stuff. But like, it's not until you get to a developed form of an exchange society, like a capitalist society, where you start to have certain levers indicating supreme power, basically. And like, in the feudal sense, supreme power was granted to the aristocracy or the monarchy through their birthright, their title, and enforced by physical prowess. Like the size of their nation, the size of their armed forces determined their power. Where in an exchange society, you have two important elements. Okay, you have equality in an exchange society, in bourgeois society. So you have this idea that like there is no actual kind of division between people that have birthright, like a title or a claim to something because they were born into a particular class. There is none of that. So you have equality in the sense that people are equal to one another from an exchange perspective. So like each person is an equal individual that engages with one another on the basis of fair trade and equal exchange. So if I'm a capitalist and I employ you to work for me as a laborer for the day, we're still equal individuals in the sense that like I am looking to buy someone's labor and then you as the laborer looking to sell your labor for a wage. We enter into that agreement as equal. So there's this idea of equality. You don't work for me, who I am, like the capitalist. You don't work for the capitalist because you belong to a class of people that are owned somehow, rather, directly or indirectly by that capitalist class. You have the choice as a free individual to go around to any capitalist and pick who you want to work for. Obviously, it's never that simple, but it's based on equality. The other thing in bourgeois society, which is different, is that it's based on exchange, which is unlike other societies before. Exchange was always part of it. Like I said, trade and commerce were part of other societies. They were crucial in the ancient world. They were crucial in feudal times. They were even crucial between like, hunter-gatherer tribes and stuff like that. Like, if you cross paths with another tribe or chiefdom or another group, another social band. And like they might have had an abundance of goods that like you didn't have. And you may have an abundance of goods that they don't have. And so you meet on the peripheries of your territories and you trade between the two of you and you get things that you just wouldn't have had the chance or the ability to get access to before. And so trade and exchange is not and like a new phenomenon. I'm not saying that bourgeois society doesn't create the free market like kind of setting out of nowhere. This has always been kind of inherent and part of like social human relations. However, it reaches its, I guess, most high development in the bourgeois form in a specifically defined exchange society. So bourgeois society is defined by the fact that it is, like I said, an exchange society. People exchange in order to survive. So let me give you a more concrete example of what the hell I'm talking about there. Let's just say that like you were a laborer again, okay? Um, you go to work for someone else. Let's say you work on a farm. Let's say you work in an office, okay? When you produce stuff, okay, on a farm or in an office, whatever work that you produce for your boss, your employer, you're not producing that for your consumption and your boss's consumption. Okay, you are producing something which is completely detached from you altogether, completely alien to you. To borrow some more Marxist terminology, if I produce a report in an office for my boss or the organization uses that report, it really means nothing to me. Like my effort and my work goes into it. But, like I can't eat that. I can't turn it into money myself. I can't turn it into a commodity that can be exchanged and I can get compensated for that. The organization does that. My boss does that. My employer does that. I simply produce something, but I produce it in an exchange manner. I am exchanging that report for money, for a wage. So then I can take that wage away, that money away, and I can go to the supermarket and buy whatever food I need. I can pay off my mortgage or I can pay the rent so I have shelter. I can pay for the luxuries that I want so I can have a fulfilling life outside of my employment. So like as a worker, as a laborer, you're part of an exchange society. You're not producing things for your consumption. You only produce things in a relationship of exchange. And this relationship, this style of relationship is pretty much ubiquitous in throughout the entirety of the capitalist system. It is very rare that you will find people that actually produce things for their own consumption. And this is increasingly the case as the productive forces develop and we become, more and more high tech as a society. Maybe a couple of generations ago, your grandparents, they might have gone to work or something like that, but they may have produced things themselves. They may have produced their own clothing to a certain extent. They might have bought materials and like entered into an exchange relationship that way and like bought some materials, but they may have made their own clothes. They may have, if they were lucky enough to have a big enough area or plot of land, they may have maybe have grown their own food to a certain extent and like only partake in an exchange relation for a very, very small part of the food they consume, or let's say a 50-50 arrangement. But like there is, in that case, their labor, what they're creating, is like half for exchange purposes and other half for their own reproduction. But like the general form of a capitalist society, like the thing that distinguishes it from other societies is that like a large and overwhelming majority of the population, if not everyone at a certain point, only engages socially, only really relates to the society because they are an individual who exchanges whatever they have with other individuals to survive. And so, like, if we can see and understand society in this way, that society is like bourgeois society, capitalist society is a society that is defined by our relations, which are based on this idea of exchanging whatever we have, exchanging anything, like I said, our labor, articles of consumption that we own, things that we create ourselves. We don't create them for consumption, but we create them for exchange. And when I say exchange as well, it's not like, okay, I produce, I don't know, a report and I trade that with my neighbor who makes potatoes or something like that. It's not a barter system. We're exchanging for money. So we exchange whatever we have for exchange value. So money is known as exchange value in this exchange society. And exchange value, like I said, is expressed as money. So we only produce things that have an exchange value, that things that can be exchanged. Like if I start producing reports like I was talking about before, but like they're reports that have absolutely no exchange value. Like I could be reporting on the clouds outside, but like no one wants to read a report on that. Maybe people need reports on a very specific matter. And if I have the skill set to report on that matter, then they may pay me for it. Like if I was a town planner and like somebody wanted a report written because they were going to lodge a development application to a governmental body. So I was able to write a report on that development and say why it's going to meet all the environmental standards out there and be consistent with the government's plans. Then that report would be worth an exchange value, and I could sell that or exchange that with someone looking for that style of report. And then I would exchange that, not, like I said, for potatoes or a car, unless I really wanted a car or potatoes. But like, I would not do it for that purpose. I would exchange it for its exchange value, its price, which is expressed in money. And then I would use that money to basically to use and spend and exchange with other people for whatever else I need. So the fundamental thing is it's exchange, but it's exchange in a developed sense. It's not a barter system. It's a developed social relation. It's a developed system of exchange, which is mediated through money specifically. So like I'm just building this foundation for you, okay? Which is what I'm trying to come to terms with. What gives money its power? Number one, humans have developed as societies to exist with a certain level of exchange. However, we did not reproduce our existence through exchange. That was, however, an important part of society, but not fundamental. Without exchange relations, societies before would still have been able to exist. And as exchange relations became more important, so thus they developed and became more complex. Money has been around for thousands and thousands of years. Many societies have used money in different formats to help lubricate kind of this exchange relation. So usually trade between differing nations or trade within urban centers within particular societies or in like military senses. So wherever there was like kind of a boundary between certain territories, you would have money being used. But like, again, this was in more of a crude or an immediate sense. So it was just to meet needs in that particular location and that territory at that specific time. But like, as humanity has developed, and like I said, commerce has developed, trade has developed, relations around exchange have developed, so has the reliance on money developed. And then we have come to this bourgeois society, so a capitalist style of living, which is or can be expressed as an exchange society, an exchange society, which is a very developed form of exchange from previous and more undeveloped forms of society. And so if you think about, like, we can start to answer the question now, why is money powerful? Why is it when a billionaire, accumulates $1 billion, why are they so powerful? Well, if you look at the entirety of society as a bunch of exchange relations, fundamentally, where no one really creates or recreates themselves, that no one really reproduces themselves and is responsible by themselves for, feeding themselves, housing themselves, and ensuring that they have all of the things that they need to live a full and meaningful existence. But the only way to acquire all of those things is through some level of exchange. Then those who own large quantities of the means of that exchange, the medium of that exchange, which is exchange value, like I said, which is expressed in money. Money seems to be the way that we have ensured that these exchange relations could work. Anyone who owns enough or accumulates enough or hoards enough of said money will have the ability to influence more exchanges within an exchange society. People want more money, so people with money have more buying power. And buying power, I get what you're saying. And buying power in this sense isn't buying power as in like, oh, I can, obviously, if I have more money, I have more buying power, as in I can withstand more and more large prices for things. I have the ability um, to meet large prices and overcome them because I have just got so much money. But buying power in the sense that if you think of all exchanges between people in terms of basically, a form of a relation, and that relation is defined by its exchange value being money, then your buying power is your power to influence as many social interactions as possible, like indirectly. But like that's the implication of what we're talking. People with more power can negotiate cheaper or get more for what they let go. And like this is like kind of the exponential curve of the ability and that comes with owning more and more of this substance, money, which is able to be the median through which all social interactions, or not all social interactions, but most social interactions within a bourgeois society, within a capitalist society, operate. So like the more of the money you have, the more you are able to mobilize social interactions in your favor. If you think of money as like I said, the median which allows all of these exchange relationships to occur in the first place, because these exchange relationships have to happen in a complex society, because like I said, people don't reproduce, they don't produce value for themselves, like to ensure their own reproduction. They have to exchange to get the items and the articles and the services that allow them to reproduce themselves. And so exchange is the predominant form of relation in our society, and that exchange is mediated through the money form. So I'm going to read you like a direct passage from Karl Marx that I think is important. So just bear with me while I find the right one. So the commodity is itself a particular thing, but as money, it is a social relations, a means of exchange, measure, and generality. The relation of the product to itself as exchange value becomes its relation to money, existing alongside it. The same contradiction between the particular nature of the commodity as a product and its general nature as exchange value, which created the necessity of positing it doubly as this particular commodity on one side and as money on the other. This contradiction between the commodity's particular natural qualities and its general social qualities contains from the beginning the possibility that these two separated forms in which the commodity exists are not convertible into each other. The commodity is demanded in exchange because of its natural properties, because of the needs for which it is the desired object. Money, by contrast, is demanded only because of its exchange value, as exchange value. Okay, so basically what Marx is talking about here is that in an exchange society, and I should have spoke about this before, we produce commodities today. So like I was talking about before with the example of like me creating a report, planning a report that like will be given to a developer so they can basically get a form of approval from the government, or a farmhand who works in an agricultural estate and produces food for the agriculturalist who then goes off and makes profit off that. We are in this exchange society producing commodities. So the difference between a commodity and a product is that like I can produce for myself something, a product, and like I can consume it. But a commodity is the same product, but it is only produced for exchange purposes. Like if I'm going to produce a report for a developer so they can go on and get some type of approval from the government, then like I am not producing that report for my consumption. I'm not a developer. I might have the skills to make that report, but like I don't, that report is basically meaningless to me. I'm completely detached from its value and its meaning. But like as a commodity, I produce that so I can use it to obtain its exchange value. So I enter into a relation with this other person, this other entity, and I trade with them this commodity, and the commodity is then literally turned into exchange value, which is money. And so, like what Marx is talking about here is the contradiction between the particular nature of the commodity as a product and its general nature as exchange value. So there is an actual value in the commodity. It has some type of value to someone. And this is what he calls its natural qualities. So this contradiction between the commodity's particular natural qualities and its general social qualities. And its social qualities is the fact that it now has exchange value. So it has a natural value, it has a value to someone as a use value, but it has an exchange value as well. And because my relation to these developers, if I'm writing this report, my only relation to these developers is that like I'm only producing this because I want money from them. Money becomes the defining moment of those social relations. And I think this is a really important concept to kind of be able to hold in one's mind, is that the only reason, for the most part, in a bourgeois society, you have relations with people, or the main driving force for the predominant form of relations that exists out there is that we relate to other people through exchange. Primarily, don't worry, I get it, you have families, people have friends and communities and stuff like that, but like the overarching social narrative that exists in our society is relations between people that are part of an exchange system. Now, you might think to yourself, oh yeah, but like I only go to work like, so many hours a day, so many days a week, or work on my business so many hours a day, so many days a week. So like it's probably more 50-50 actually. It's not even the predominant. But like you have to think about the relations as well that you don't even see, or like you don't actually even have any sort of control over at all. They are hugely predominant in your life. Now, like let's just say that you made yourself breakfast today, and you made yourself a piece of toast. Now, your friends and your family, unless they literally made the grain and made the flour and literally made the dough for the bread from scratch, which is very unlikely. I'm just going to assume it's not that case. The only reason that you ate breakfast this morning, you had a piece of toast and you put it in the toaster, is because somebody else or like thousands of people came together to make the wheat that was then ground into flour, and then that flour was added with other ingredients, and then those ingredients were combined by a particular person in a particular setting somewhere, and they made the bread, and then somebody made the machine that cuts the bread and puts it into a bag, and then someone drove the truck from the warehouse or the distribution center to the supermarket where you bought that bread, and then somebody made all of the components, or multiple businesses made all of the components that went into the toaster. Someone designed the toaster, and then someone in some warehouse or industrial sector somewhere put together all the components of the toaster, and then that toaster went into a box and was distributed by some like international shipping route or something like that, and got to the store that you bought it from somehow. And like your real social connections, actually, after you buying that toaster and you buying that loaf of bread, like you have actually had social connections with thousands and thousands of people, like untold numbers of people. You wouldn't be able to fathom all of the relations that came together to allow you to have toast for breakfast this morning. You wouldn't be able to perceive of it. Your mind, like you couldn't go there, because like it's so complex and varied, especially in a globalized world. Like it's not the case anymore that like, you know, countries are pretty much self-sufficient. That's something from Marx's time, from about 200 years ago. And like it's very questionable whether those countries were self-sufficient at all, or if they were based on like colonial networks, which is exploiting world markets for their own benefit. But that's a completely different matter. We're not going to get into that now. But like your social relations, how you got that toast in your mouth and how you toasted it using that toaster is composed of that. And so like if you think of it like that, when you engaged in that exchange relationship, when you bought that toaster, when you bought that loaf of bread, when you traded your time, your productive time, and exchanged that for money so you could buy the bread and the toaster, that puts you in part of a very vast and complex web of social relations that are all based on exchange, and all of those exchanges are mediated in money. And so like if you have enough money, you can influence all of those social interactions, and you could have power over all of those social interactions, which is an incredibly mind-boggling concept. So social power derived from the monetary form, if you think about how complex social relations are in a bourgeois society, how like it's just this infinite network and this infinite web of kind of exchange relations between multiple individuals that come together to give you just as basic as a piece of toast, then like a majority of your social interactions, to be honest, are not the ones that you spend hours on, you know, with, you know, your most intimate friends and family or loved ones. It is the fact that like, because of your exchange relations, because of the fact that in order to reproduce yourself, you must exchange something with someone else in order to do that. That's the majority of your social relations. And they're the things that reproduce you to the largest extent. Again, not discounting your personal relations, but for the largest extent, this is the case for you. So look, and a little bit more I will read. I hope out of context this type of stuff makes sense, but I will explain it as I go. A closer examination of these external relations, these conditions, shows, however, that it is impossible for individuals of a class to overcome them en masse without destroying them. A particular individual may by chance get on top of these relations. Okay, so an individual may accumulate enough money and get on top of all of these relations and control them. But the mass of those under their rule, but the mass of those under their rule cannot, since their mere existence expresses subordination the necessary subordination of the mass of individuals. So this is another reason why you can only have so many people, like a handful of people in any society, that are the richest people out there. So at the moment it's billionaires, so you can only have a handful or a slim majority of the population that are billionaires. Soon it will be trillionaires, I'm sure. Whereas, one day, like 100 years ago, like the richest people were millionaires. Now millionaires are pretty common, so it's billionaires. What he's saying here is a particular individual may have a chance to get on top of these relations, but the mass of those under their rule cannot, since their mere existence expresses subordination. It is necessary to have a mass of individuals out there that are involved in the social relations and make all of these social relations go around effectively. And so if you had like too many billionaires out there, too many chefs, then like this system of exchange wouldn't work. And that's why you have some people that have the ability to accumulate untold riches and use that for social power, and others cannot. The objective dependency relation is nothing more than social relations which have become independent and now enter into opposition to the seemingly independent individuals, in such a way that individuals are now ruled by abstractions, where earlier they depended on one another. The abstraction or idea however, is nothing more than the theoretical expression of those material relations which are their lord and master. We are ruled by abstractions, whereas we once depended directly on each other to survive. So, like I said before, we are ruled now by exchanges with one another in terms of our social relations, as opposed to relying on somebody else to actually produce something that you need and having to build up a relationship with that person. So like, let's say I was a farmer and somebody else was a producer of agricultural tools. Like, as a farmer and as a producer of agricultural tools, then we'd have to have a pretty important relationship, because like, I might produce the food, but they produce the tools that help me make the food. So we're, involved in a more immediate relation there. We might be able to, literally just relate with one another in order to ensure our survival. But now we are ruled by mere abstractions from the fact that, okay, I need to eat that loaf of bread now to survive. But it's not like I'm just relating to a baker who does everything. Like, there might be thousands of people that get to the point where the baker is allowed to make bread. And so the only way that I can relate to all of those 1,000 people, because it's impossible otherwise, it's impossible to have that many relations, would be through an abstraction, which is money. So money is this weird thing that kind of rules over our social relations and captivates us in this exchange society, which I think is incredibly, is an incredible concept to grapple with. Like, absolutely incredible. Now, there was one other point that I want to raise, which Marx talks about, which I think is very interesting, is that a common standard, so like in the exchange relation kind of thing, like money is the medium of exchange relations. So the exchanges between all individuals that occurs. Money is that median, is that force that moves between all exchange relations and makes them all common, so that they can exist. A common standard in the price of anything presupposes its frequent and familiar alienation. So basically, a price, or the fact that there is an exchange value for things, presupposes as well that there is a system where things are being produced and consistently alienated from the producers. So this is a concept that we talked about last week, which is alienation. But like, in order to have a system of exchange and of exchange values that reign supreme, it presupposes a society that has basically given up on producing, where individuals produce for their own needs, and only produce articles which then become alien to them, so that they're only produced for others' consumption and for others' use. And so, like, what's really interesting about that is like how tightly knit society is as a result of that. Like, if I cannot survive unless I'm in relation to you and 1,000 other people, and like other people, all the other thousands of people out there are only able to survive because they're in some, very detached relationship with all of, like, with me and everyone else. Like, society is inextricably linked now. Like, before, you could really be an individual in, like, another time, like pre-industrial capitalism. Maybe you lived self-sufficiently, you had a large enough plot and you basically made enough of your own food, and your own goods, and like you traded some of that. So if you really needed money, you just traded a little bit of stuff and you bought stuff that you really couldn't make for yourself. But like, for the most part, you're pretty self-sufficient. But like now, because of like how technical society is in terms of like our scientific understanding, our knowledge, our means of production, so the technology, the machinery, the science, the knowledge, the understanding that we have now has made a society where we're so linked to each other through exchange. We are incredibly reliant on everyone out there to reproduce our existence as individuals and as a society of individuals. And so, really, we are more socially dependent on society now than maybe we have ever been in human history. And that's really exciting. Like, it's scary in the sense that, like, in the capitalist system, you have crises of production. And so, like, when you have a crisis, like, everyone's thrown into this crisis as well, and it affects everyone because we're so closely linked to one another. We rely so heavily on each other to survive. Like, it's scary in that sense because everyone's relations are mediated only by their exchange value to one another. But like, if we have a complex society now that is based on, infinite numbers of relations, and all of those relations are mediated by exchanged value, so like the money that goes with all of the interactions between all of the different people out there, if we were able to replace exchange value as the medium to which all social relations flow, we could still have the complex society part, but we could do it without the exchange value or money being that predominant feature. Then that would be a revolutionary society, and that would be an absolute game changer for humanity generally. So the real question we should be asking ourselves, like establishing this idea of what the hell money is and why does it give power? Like, okay, money gives power because it helps mediate all of the relations that we have. And if you have enough money, then you can control much more relations out there. And like, you can really basically dictate what the market is doing, and you can pull upon your monetary power to draw more and more social relations, and you can get more stuff done in your favor the more money you have. But like, we could acknowledge the fact that we live in an incredibly complex and tight-knit society now. But like, if we were able to reduce the requirement of exchange values in social relations, because we've gotten to a point where our technology is so important and so developed, we could change the idea that money has social power. I'll give you just a quick example, and I've talked about this often, but like, housing is a need. Okay, housing is a definite need. People need shelter. It's part of our survival requirements. Housing is also a human right. It's in the UN Charter for Human Rights, and quality housing too, not just like a shoebox. But like, you could take housing off the market. We in developed countries and in this stage of capitalism definitely have the means of production and the actual produce out there, the articles of production, the commodities out there, we have enough in order to ensure that all people in whatever society, let's just use the case of Australia because I am in Australia, we have the means to produce housing for everyone. And so you could take it off the market. And so the relationship between people in terms of how they get housing in the Australian economy, in Australian society, could be retracted from being one that's based on exchange. And so, like, if people, wanted to, have a home kind of thing, they wouldn't have to enter into exchange relations to get it. Like, that could be provided by society, either as a community operation or by the government or something like that. But you could take housing off the market, and that would basically make redundant exchange relations in the provision of housing. You'd still have a construction industry. There's still commercial buildings. There's still industrial construction. There's infrastructure construction. There's all forms of construction out there. But like, you could take housing off the market and ensure that your population doesn't have to enter into exchange relations or consider exchange relations when thinking about whether or not they have a place to live. I've just missed a bit in the chat with my large rant there. But yo, what's up? Give up the rock. What did I miss? It's almost like we recently recorded a podcast on this. Yes, but like, I'm talking about beyond like just the housing kind of thing. I'm trying to get to the bottom of where social power comes from in society. Why money has social power in our society, and like looking the absolute fundamentals of bourgeois and capitalist society to get that understanding. Because it's like I said earlier, it's common sense that money is power, man, like kind of thing. But like, why is it power? And so like, yeah, exchanging money for heat, need a pile of it to burn though. Yeah, I guess you could literally use money to create heat by burning it. Unfortunately, in the modern era, in the now part of the 21st century, we're relying less and less on cash money and more of money in the digital form. And so you can't burn digital money, unfortunately, Sweep. Going back to absolute basics for IS. Yes, absolute basics. And I think it's important because like, it really gives you a solid understanding and a platform to work with. It's not like just speculation about like, oh yeah, money power comes because like, people get a lot of money and you can buy a lot of stuff with a lot of money, so money equals power. It's a lot more detailed and intricate than that. It is really about the fact that like, in a society is a conglomeration of social relations. And like, as much as we like to think of ourselves as individuals, we may be individuals from a market perspective, as like where all of these independent people that have come together and exchange what they have with others to make society go round. We are also individuals only exist because they exist within a society. You can't have an individual without society, which is antithetical to the liberal ethos, which is like society prior to like, market forms of existence. Humans were just a bunch of individuals running around aimlessly, killing each other, living in a state of nature, war and nature. And it wasn't until they came together and like exchanged with one another that civilized them and got rid of this warring and element. And like, humans naturally came together to make, as individuals, to make societies. No, society produces the conditions in a developed society, like we've explained, in a developed exchange society, develops the grounds for individuals. Because, like, in feudal times, there wasn't this focus on individuals, and individuals were useless to that system because, like, people related to each other in communes. They came together as groups and sects of society. They worked their communal effort to produce goods for that entire social formation. The individual was, like I said, was useless. There was very few people that would have been individuals, to be honest. Wealthy people don't have traditional money, to your point about cash, but instead hold promissory notes, i.e., capital or loaned out cash. Burning cash is a purpose, especially with how companies have silently put surcharges on their transactions in 2024 onwards. Some social value comes from owning that thing or from holding that loan over others. So yeah, social value, I guess, definitely comes from owning things. Social power definitely comes from owning things. But in an exchange society, and I think this is the fundamental point that Marx is trying to make in the Grundrisse, which is incredibly insightful, is that owning things in an exchange society means something different to owning things in like a feudal society. You own things in a feudal society because your social caste, your group, so let's say you're a part of the aristocracy, has the birthright to own that sort of stuff. Like there was no serfs who owned anything. They were basically tied to the land, and that land was owned by like a feudal lord or something like that. In an exchange society, all humans, regardless of their monetary power, are able to own things. It's actually one of the fundamental principles of bourgeois society that like anyone can own anything. And like it is that ownership, which is what you're talking about, Squeeb. It is that ownership that is exchanged in an exchange society. It is not the commodities themselves that are traded in a sense when like two people come together to buy one thing off another, off each other, off one another. But it is actually the title of those commodities that are owned, so that are transferred. So like if I lived in a house or if I owned a house, like you don't physically, like if someone bought a house off me, they don't physically pick the house up and like say, here you go, it's yours now, kind of thing. The title to the house is what is bought and sold. The ownership of that house is bought or sold, and then the title passes from one person to another as part of that exchange relationship. So really the commodities exist as they are. It's who owns them in an exchange society, which is traded on and exchanged on. The commodity itself may not even exist. In reality, it might just be an idea like copyright or something like that. But it's like who owns that idea, who has the title to that idea. That's where the social power comes, and that is only delivered and it is only allowed to transpire thanks to exchange relations. Housing as an exchange value is wild when you consider it economically as a normal good. Now, I'm starting to get some weird feedback coming through on my end. Can you just let me know in the chat, are you getting a delay, or is the video and the audio out of sync? Can you see that in the chat? Because I'm starting to see that on my end, which I don't know why this is happening. Is your inner voice, we can't hear that. Well, thank you. Thank you, Squeeb. I appreciate that. It is out of sync? It might be slightly delayed. Damn, it is out of sync. I thought there was something going on here. I don't know why this keeps happening. It's on a Monday. Like all throughout last week, it was fine. And here we are on Monday, like we were last week, and the camera is out of sync. It's really annoying. I don't know why it does this. I'm going to try and change camera and see if that makes a difference. Yeah, you're fine with Twitch. Oh, look, I was fine with YouTube on Friday as well. I don't know what's made the difference here. But yeah, YouTube is doing a number on you, especially on a Monday, apparently. Let's see if this makes a difference. I don't know if that has changed anything or not. It's so annoying. It's so annoying. I'm going to try this now. And just take it. Let's see if that works. I think that's better. I don't see the delay anymore. Yeah, it's in sync. Let's see if this is still in sync. No, it's not. We've changed that. All right. I think. No, it's delayed again. Damn. I thought that would have solved the problem. Okay. Whatever. Anyway, I'm going to stop my rant now because I've actually been ranting on for like over an hour based on good old Karl Marx here. So thank you very much, Karl Marx and the Grundrisse. New camera kinks. Yeah, tell me about it. But like, I'm going to go over now and like, just bear with me because I'm sure this is not everyone's cup of tea. But like, I'm going to go over now and have a look at a video by I guess this guy is a Marxist, and he's going to kind of explain what I've been speaking about or talk about what I've been speaking about in terms of how money works in the Marxist kind of analysis of capitalism. And like, I'm interested to see what this person has to say, and like I might just chime in and talk about it too whenever I feel appropriate. I don't know why this camera is doing this. Let's see if I can get it. Let's see if I can get it. That might make a difference. Nope. Sorry, just bear with me. Technical issues. I do apologize. Need a tech guy. All right. That's better. It's actually synced now. Why is the camera doing this? Why? Why? Oh, why? So yeah, this is the guy. His name is Michael Heinrich. He sounds German. And like, how appropriate. Because like, who better to understand Karl Marx than a German, right?
The value of commodities cannot be measured directly with hours of labor time. This is an illusion. You must measure it with money.
Okay, so what he's talking about is that like every commodity, every product that exists has labor stored into it. So this book has labor inside of it. This microphone has labor inside of it. This cup of coffee has labor inside of it. It's funny, the cup itself had labor inside of it because someone made the cup, right? Like, I know today that everyone uses machines and stuff, and no one probably actually made the cup. It was made by a machine, but like someone made the machine that made the cup. So like technically the labor is objectified in this cup. And so the cup has value because of the labor that was put into it. Like, that's the actual thing that gives products their value. It's not like this conceptual notion. in an exchange society, oh, we need to be able to exchange commodities, so let's just make money, and then that'll be the way that everything circulates, and like it'll just be based on this arbitrary figure that everyone agrees on, kind of thing. No, there is actual value inside something, which is the basis for its monetary value, and that is labor. Someone put work in to make this cup, this mug. Now the coffee inside of it that like I made, like I actually put my labor into making that. I boiled the jug, I put the coffee inside it, and I got the spoon out and like stirred it around a little bit. Now, like the difference is there that like I didn't make that coffee as a commodity. I made it for my own personal consumption, which is like goes back to the discussion we were having to before. Yeah, I run Hubbard. But like, yeah, there is inherent value in all of the commodities out there. And so like basically there's this idea that Marx discusses in the Grundrisse and in Capital and stuff like that, that like just because like things get their value because someone's made them and put their effort and their time into it, their labor into it, that doesn't mean that you can express that value in labor. So like I can't walk up and just be like, here, this cup here was worth 10 hours of labor. I will trade this cup for this book that was worth 20 hours of labor. Okay, 20 hours of labor, so I better give you 2 cups for that book. Like, while labor gives value to the commodities, you cannot express value, exchange value in labor. And I'm assuming this guy's going to explain why you can't do that. But like basically along the lines of like what Karl Marx has talked about is like labor is varied. It's a variable and it's very specific. And so like you need, in order for exchange to work, you need a universal equivalent, something that can measure things, can act as a medium of exchange, can be a commodity in its own right, and money can do all of those things in various forms, in terms of coins, cash, promissory notes, credit, whatever. Money has that ability, where labor, because labor is very, very specific and unique to a certain time period, to a certain level of development, it doesn't offer the same flexibility as money does. And so that's why you can't use labor as a determining factor when you're trying to figure out exchange values.
When Marx speaks about value, the value of the commodity, he never really meant a single commodity. A single commodity has no value. A single labor product cannot even be a single commodity. It is a contradiction in itself. Commodity presupposes exchange, and exchange.
Have a good day. Good job. See you later, Squeeb. Thank you very much for interacting and saying hi. Do appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. There seems to be 4 viewers at the moment. Squeeb is about to go, so let's just call that 3. If you are there and you haven't said hi yet, please say hello. You know, don't be shy, don't be rude. Say hello in the chat so I know you're there, unless you're working or something and you just got this on in the background and you can't actually engage in the chat. If you can engage in the chat, say hi, please. So let's get back to Michael Heinrich and his explanation of what money is from a Marxist perspective.
Presupposes that there are, it is a contradiction in itself. Commodity presupposes exchange, and exchange presupposes that there are 2 commodities which are exchanged. And therefore, value can only be a common attribute of at least 2 commodities and not an attribute of a single commodity.
Okay, so like if you're not following what he's talking about the fact that like in the bourgeois society and in exchange society, we produce commodities which are valuable items that aren't for immediate consumption by the producer. Therefore, they're only really intended to be exchanged. And so like you make something so you can get its exchange value. You can get money for producing that certain thing. But like exchange value or an exchange system assumes that there are multiple commodities out there in order to be exchanged. A commodity doesn't have an exchange value inherent within it because it's only exchangeable if there are heaps of commodities out there to be exchanged. So like a commodity by itself is not valuable. It's not valuable at all. You need to have a whole system where there are commodities, and then you can express commodities as their exchange value, and their exchange value is money, and like the monetary expression of their value is their price. So it's an interesting concept.
Marx rather briefly says this in the third subchapter of chapter 1, which is devoted to the so-called value form. In much more clarity, he states this in a manuscript devoted to reworking volume 1 for the second edition, a manuscript which until now exists only in German, but in an article published this year in Brazil, the main parts of these manuscripts are translated in Portuguese. And there we can learn that value is not an attribute of a single commodity. But this means that value is a certain kind of relation. This also counts then for the substance of value for abstract labor. And that abstract labor is not a substance limited to something single, but that it's always a relation, has a consequence. Marx explained at the beginning of chapter 3 of volume 1, but what is very often misunderstood. Chapter 3 of volume 1 deals with money as measure of value, with money as mean of circulation, and with money, as this third part of chapter 3 is known. But Marx doesn't give just a list of functions of money, especially in the first subchapter of chapter 3.
It's always German or Dutch historians who randomly say tips on the internet. Thank you very much for AS. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, I do hope I resolve my technical issues. See you later. Have a good rest of your day. And to the rest of you viewers, if you are actually watching this, like I said, please interact if you can. If you can't, so be it. But say hi. If you have any questions while I'm nerding out on this German dude talking about Karl Marx, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Money as measure of value, he discusses the immanent relation between money and value. Very briefly, in a footnote, he says that the labor time is, or the labor is measured by time. You work 5 hours, 10 hours. What counts for value is only the average labor time, not the individual labor time. But nevertheless, the value of commodities cannot be measured directly with hours of labor time. This is an illusion. You must measure it with money. So, to use money as a measure of value is not a kind of arbitrary decision. It is not a kind of convention. What, for example, John Locke thought, that people agreed, oh yes, let's use money. No, to measure value by money is a necessity, because labor time can only be attributed to the single commodity, but the single commodity doesn't give us really the value. Value we only see in a relation where production
So what he's talking about here is, I think it's interesting, is that like I was saying before, labor gives like value in the commodity. It's embodied within the cup, kind of thing. Without the labor, like the cup kind of it doesn't exist. So its value is derived from that labor. And but like what he's saying is like, and like what I was saying before, like labor is like this variable component, this variable factor. It changes from person to person. It changes. It's particular. It's too varied to be like this constant kind of thing. Like there's no average, really average type of labor out there. It's really specific, I think, to the individual. And because like a very specific form of labor goes into this cup, like you can't use that type of labor to measure against like other commodities and the labor that goes into a microphone or the computer screen over there. Like it's not consistent enough to be a real measure of value. And so if it's not consistent enough to be a real measure of value, you need something else. It's a necessity in order in an exchange society to have something else that can be a universal equivalent, can be used to measure the value of commodities, all commodities, and used as a medium of exchange for those commodities, and somehow represent the value that's in those commodities. And that's where you get money from.
And exchange determines this relation. And this relation can be measured only by the means which is mediating this relation, and this is money. Therefore, Marx argues that money as a measure of value is necessary and that we cannot avoid this, like, for example, Proudhon, a socialist contemporary of Marx, wanted to do. He wanted to abolish money but to preserve commodity production. And this he calls socialism. And Marx argues this is impossible. You cannot.
I think this is a really important point, okay? Because like I always often argue with like self-righteous, I was going to say something else, but I'll be nice. Self-righteous lefties who like will come up at me when I say like, you know, the USSR wasn't socialist or China isn't socialist, in the sense that like Proudhon, like a French socialist at the time, an anarchist, was arguing around the time that Marx was writing Capital and all that sort of stuff, and the Grundrisse. So he was arguing that like, hey, money seems to be the problem here. Money is the source of all evil. This is a very old kind of notion. Like let's just replace the money form and then everything will be okay. So like his idea was these thing called time chits, which were like basically like to replace money, you would have like these tokens, and like if you worked like 2 hours in a factory or something like that, then like you would receive a token that was good for 2 hours of labor, kind of thing. And so like the socialists at the time, their kind of idea was like, hey, get rid of money. Money is the problem, and we will just replace it with a currency based on labor. And so like what this gentleman is saying exactly is that that doesn't make sense. Like money is the universal kind of measure of value. Money is the medium of exchange that is necessary in an exchange society. If you're upset with money, you're displacing, your rage is being displaced, or it's being directed at the wrong type of thing. The issue is that labor and people's efforts and productive capacity is being spent on creating commodities, which are articles of exchange. What you should be doing is you should be producing a society that its focus is not on producing commodities, i.e. items for exchange, and that are being, you know, exploited for their exchange value. You should be producing outside of a focus on exchange value. You can still produce things to be exchanged because humans need to get things somehow. But like, do you produce commodities simply for their exchange value? So like money can still exist You can still have money because money's been around before capitalism and it will be around after capitalism. You can still have money as this medium of exchange, this measure of value, this almost arbitrary measure of value. But like the fundamental, the key here is, and this is why we spend so much time with this at the beginning, is like, well, you've actually got a society that's based on exchange, and more specifically that it's like producing commodities for exchange, and its focus is on the exchange value, the money. Its focus is on the money. It's trying to create the system which produces as much money as possible, and it does that through commodities and focusing on their exchange value. So maybe if you were a socialist, maybe if you were really concerned about socializing the means of production and creating a society which takes its focus off commodity production, like you would be rethinking how you deal with exchange value and commodity production as opposed to just considering how you deal with money. And so, like a lot of these socialists that I will discuss or debate with in comment sections about whether, China is socialist or whether the USSR actually was socialist, when you confront them with the fact that like none of these societies were able to basically resolve the capital to labor relation, and none of them were able to resolve the fact that their societies were based around commodity production, because commodity production is a feature of capitalism. Like if you present them with those facts, like they want to talk about like, oh yeah, but they did this and they did this and like, they abolished this and they killed the bourgeoisie or something like that. Yeah, it's just like, but what do they do about exchange value? What do they do about commodity production? Like in a lot of the cases, like in the USSR and stuff like that, they ramped up commodity production. Look at China today. China is the industrial powerhouse of the entire globalized world. It is the center of commodity production. And so like they're not producing commodities just for their exchange. They're producing it for their exchange value. And if you're producing stuff just for its exchange value, you're producing so you can make more money off that. You're making profit. You're accumulating capital. That's like the antithesis of socialism, or this antithesis of being a communist or something like that. If you're partaking in the commodity production, like wheelhouse in order to extract profit from it. So like, okay, the USSR might not have been extracting profit from commodity production, but they were definitely like producing commodities, and they were doing that for like the profit of the state, so the state could direct like who gets what and what like endeavors they were going to like what endeavors they were going to partake in next, and all that sort of stuff. So okay, they're not doing it for some type of presupposed bourgeois class, but they're doing it for like a ruling class that exists within the state apparatus. Like, what's the difference? It's still commodity production at the end of the day, unless you're going to attack commodity production and its focus on producing exchange values in order to accumulate more capital and restart the process over and over again. Unless you attack that fundamental feature, don't go on to me about how socialist you are.
Abolish money, but keep on commodity production. Whenever you have commodity production, you need money as this measure of value. So between value and money is a much more close relationship than in all other economic theories. In Capital, this becomes clear when we see the structure of the first 4 chapters. In each chapter, money plays a very crucial role, but in a very different way, which I here can only sketch very briefly. In the first chapter, there is the subchapter of value form. The last value form Marx discusses is the money form. In chapter 2, where for the first time Marx analyzes the action of the commodity owners in exchange, for the first time money plays a role. So we have to distinguish between money form, chapter 1, and money, chapter 2. And then in the third chapter, with the nice title, Money or the Circulation of Commodities, we see money as the mediating of commodities. This is a third aspect of money with a lot of sub aspects treated in this chapter. And in the fourth chapter, which has the nice title Transformation of Money in Capital, we see not only what is mainly discussed, the secret of the surplus value, that it's the buying and selling of labor power as a commodity. In the first subchapter of chapter 4, we see money as the, now it's difficult to say it in English, in German, it is the nice word übergreifendes Subjekt, meaning the over-catching subject, money, in the process of valorization. Marx has in this chapter his general formula: money, commodity, more money, valorization, value becomes more money. But that this process starts with money is not by accident. Money here is the independent form of value which is necessary, the necessary form of capital. So
just like really quickly what he's talking about, because I think it is important, is like in any type of society where you have commerce, okay, so you have trade between nations, all that sort of stuff, which is like usually the argument that people have when they're talking about like how natural capitalism is, or like it's human nature to be greedy, because like money's always existed, people have always trade, and there's always been commerce, right? So like in that form of commerce, in that form of trade and just like general exchange, you have commodity to money and back to commodity. So like if I don't know, produce tables, and then like I go to the marketplace to sell my tables, then I have a commodity, the table, and then I will sell that for money. So it goes commodity to money. And then I will take that money, and at the end of the day, I might leave my table stall, and then I have other stuff that I need to buy. Maybe it's more wood to produce more tables. So then I take the money that I've acquired and I buy more wood and I get more commodity. So in the usual commerce sense, in the usual trade sense, you have commodity to money to commodity. And that's like the typical way that commerce has worked or trade has worked throughout the ages. And like, don't get me wrong, there have been some people kind of that have stepped in and like just looked at the money component of that. Banks have been around for a long time. Merchant capitalists or merchants have been around for a long time. Miserers, so moneylenders have been around for long enough, and people that like kind of just like dealt with the money form, they've been around forever. But like for the most part, trade and commerce has been done on kind of this, and exchange generally is done on this idea and this basis of, you know, commodity to money. So you buy something with your money, and then you sell a commodity, the commodity that you bring to market for money, and then you use that money for your own purposes, and then you get commodities again. But in capitalism, in a fully developed exchange society, you have the ability, because exchange is so predominant, and money being the medium of exchange, the mediator between commodities, is so prevalent. And like all social relations are built around the exchange and thus the money form, you have the ability to start with money. So you like, as an investor, as a new capitalist, as someone who's budding to be an entrepreneur, you start with money, and then you invest in something, in some form of capital, and then you turn that capital, so that commodity that you've bought, you use your money, you transfer to commodity, and then you transfer commodity back into the money form, and hopefully it's more money than you started with, that's the sign of a good capitalist, or a good entrepreneur or a good investor or something like that. You start with money, you get commodity, you go to money again. And that's the form of the cycle. And that's what he's talking about here. This is the unique cycle which is predominant in the capitalist mode of production. So it presupposes a society of developed and complex exchange relations and exchange value, i.e. money, and money is the article. So expanded money is kind of the raison d'être, the reason for being of this system. To basically have capital is to invest and get more capital or money form at the end of your process, i.e. profit, basically. The basis of profit is this idea of accumulating capital and accumulating or starting with a certain amount of money and ending with a larger amount of money. It's a really fundamental concept in like Marx's analysis of capitalism, which is what he's explaining at the moment.
In chapter 4, we see money as a form of capital. And now let's put this together. Chapter 1, the money form of value. Chapter 2, the real money as a result of the real exchange of commodity owners. Chapter 3, money in the commodity circulation. And chapter 4, money as the independent form of value, which is the crucial point for the movement of capital. So you see, money plays a crucial role on the one hand to understand value, on the other hand to understand capital. And these are only the first 4 chapters of Capital, but the story goes on, and especially in volume 3, we will see another interesting form of money in the system of credit and fictitious capital. But this is another story which maybe will be told in another session.
That was cool. And it's so much more authentic when you have someone with a German accent talking about it. I love it. Love it. All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to go have a look at a guy called David Graeber. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Graeber, but like, yeah, Graeber is an anarchist, an anthropologist by trade. But like, I think he made his name and cut his teeth in activism. So like, he, as an anarchist, he's all about kind of direct action. So like, he would go out and like intervene with the system in a way that he thought was necessary to confront the dark realities of the system, and to kind of paint a picture to everyone that like the system has problems. And so like, he's done a lot of work from an anthropological sense about analyzing kind of capitalism, or like at least analyzing the woes of modern society. And so he's quite influential in this space. But like, he's written a book called Debt the First 5,000 Years, which has made him quite an authority on the topic of money. Like specifically, he's looking at this through the eyes and the lens of debt. So you must take that in consideration when you're thinking of him speak. But I do think his insights in relation to debt, and i.e. the history of money, then will be useful in our voyage of discovery about like where and what gives money its social power. Because I still feel like we don't have a complete and overarching understanding yet of how money gets its social power, and I really want to do that. Like, maybe I'll have to devote a few streams to this, because it's like, it's a heavy concept and it's not just going to be done in a couple of hours. But like, let's see what Graeber says about like, where the hell did money come from in the first place? If money's got all this power and it's got all this social power and it's got all of this power over us as humans, like, where the hell did it come from then? I think that might be important. Instead of just thinking about money theoretically, let's think about it as a historical form of relations between people. And Graeber has done that incredibly well, I think.
When I began exploring this, one of the first things I looked at was the history of money itself. Because I said, okay, what is a debt? A debt is essentially a promise
See, like
you can
he's
phrase.
straight away he's
began explaining-
conflating or correlating money and debt. That's a big thing for him. Okay, it's what's made him so popular. To be honest.
One of the first things I looked at was the history of money itself. Because you say, okay, what is a debt? A debt is essentially a promise which you can phrase in exactly quantifiable terms. Because you can quantify it, it's impersonal. And because it's impersonal, it's transferable. So, if I promise you that I will meet you at 5 o'clock, you can't actually transfer that to someone else, normally speaking. I guess in some circumstances you could. But a promise which is quantifiable, I promise you give you exactly this amount of things, you actually can turn over to someone else. And in a way that, according to many theories, that's what money actually is a transferable promise to render a certain amount of goods. One of the great questions is how that comes about. Why the need to quantify promises happens, or to quantify them precisely. And we've had a story about why this happens that you read in your basic economic 101 textbook. It was actually invented by Adam Smith in 1776. The Wealth of Nations is the first time you see someone really making the argument in detail. And it continues to be the story that everybody knows and learns. They pick up somewhere or another. It becomes common sense. And here, as an anthropologist, I must say that I have a kind of a pet peeve in this respect, because it's a professional pet peeve on the part of anthropologists, because this story was told, over 200 years ago.
Shen Yun brings 5,000 years of culture to...
Yes, that's like the best ad I've ever gotten on here. The algorithms pinned me for a lover of Chinese arts.
On the part of anthropologists, because this story was told, over 200 years ago.
So basically, if you're not aware of what he's talking about right now, what he is discussing is this idea that there is this kind of thinking in economics, which is very prevalent. And most people believe this today. It's a common sense notion that money developed out of barter. So people used to be like, I'll trade you I want your cow. What do you want? And the person's like, oh, well, my cow's worth 20 chickens. And so eventually that got really confusing and really, that was really inefficient and became really hard to manage on large scales. So people were like, oh, well, instead of trading 20 chickens for a cow, let's say that they're both 20 chickens and a cow is equal to 3 gold coins. And so the median of exchange was born, and so everybody just started using money because it was just so much more convenient than bartering. And that's the general kind of bourgeois notion of money and exchange, is that it developed out of convenience because exchange was so important and inherent in human nature. And so the natural progression of barter, it's this natural evolution. You have people producing for themselves, and then they produce more than they need, and then so they start to exchange and barter with one another. And then as people start specializing and producing only one type of thing, they rely more on exchange, and barter becomes, like I said, inconvenient, so they need more of an exchange intermediary, and so money is born, and money assumes the process of barter. And that's been the natural kind of story that's come about out of bourgeois society and from all the bourgeois economists, which was started 200 years ago according to him by Adam Smith. And it's all nonsense. Historically speaking, that's not what the human story shows us. And he'll break that down. I'm pretty sure he will.
Go. Almost immediately, we started going out in the world trying to find examples of people who do it, and we couldn't. It's not true. But they never changed the textbooks. We just can't get them to come up with a different story. But all right, here's the story. You've all heard it before. Once upon a time, people lived in villages, and they used to swap things. There was barter. Say I wanted somebody's cow. Well, I said, all right, hey, I need a cow. Tell you what, I'll give you 30 chickens for that cow.
Oh, I was
And
close.
the guy's like, well,
I said
don't
20
know,
chickens.
30's not much. 40 chickens, 45. All right, sold. So you come to some sort of arrangement, swap, go home. But the problem is maybe the guy doesn't want chickens. Maybe you don't happen to have anything he wants right now. What happens? Well, you can't make a deal, right? So the only way out of this problem crops up more and more over time, is to settle on something that everybody usually wants, like gold for some reason. Shiny metal, but it's kind of handy and pretty. There's a virtuous circle. The moment you start using it as a general equivalent, everybody needs it all the time, it turns into money. So barter is inconvenient, you get money, government gets involved and starts stamping the stuff for uniform weights and quality, although it starts cheating all the time and debasing the currency because governments are bad in this version. Gradually you invent credit systems, and it's an evolutionary series. Barter, money, credit, securitized derivatives and whatnot are just sort of the last link in the chain. It follows logically.
What he's critiquing there is like how, like in 2008, the economy crashed because they were making these very, very complex, which no one understands really, derivatives. And like trading them like across countries and on financial markets. And like when everyone figured out that they actually hold no value and started to sell them, the entire global economy crashed. So he's saying like the natural progression is from barter to money to credit to these types of derivatives. He's being a smartass, which is, if you know what he's talking about, it's pretty funny.
All right, so that's the story. As I say, there's one big problem. We've been scouring the world for over 200 years now, and we have never found a single community where everyday transactions take the form of, I'll give you 40 chickens for that cow. It's just they don't exist. Adam Smith himself had no way to know this. He was just speculating, but now we do, and they keep on telling the story. If you look at contemporary economic textbooks, the old ones used to say, well, primitive people do this, and now that they kind of know it's not true, they don't want to stop. So instead they say, well, imagine you didn't have money. What would you have to do? How would you get breakfast? Well, you'd have to barter, wouldn't you? And they told the story as a kind of parable, which is basically what it is.
So that's an interesting concept if you think about it, right? That like we live in an exchange society at the moment. And because we live in an exchange society, we have an understanding of the world. We have a set view of things, we have a perspective, we have an ideology. And the only way for us to conceive of like, okay, what happened if money disappeared tomorrow? How would you survive? And we use that type of kind of thought experiment and we reverse engineer where money came from through that. So like if money disappeared tomorrow, how would you get your breakfast? I love the breakfast example. I'm so glad that he used it. How would you buy your toaster and your toast? How would you get that? You'd have to exchange something for it. Maybe you'd give up your jacket, your mask. I don't know. Maybe if you were hungry enough, you'd give up your laptop or your television or something like that. And you'd barter with people that had that stuff to exist. But like this is in an experimental world, a thought experiment world where like you had money and then all of a sudden it disappeared. How would you survive? But like that's not how money developed or came into existence. I think that's a really important understanding. And it's really important for us to understand as revolutionaries is that like because of the type of society that you live in, we live in a bourgeois society, an exchange society, a capitalist mode of production. There are inherent common sense notions, there are inherent ideas that come with living in this type of society that have no basis in reality. And one of them is this story of where money comes from, and money comes from barter. That doesn't really exist in reality, but it's like a common sense notion if you're someone who lives in a society where all of your social relations are defined by how you exchange with other people. And all of our exchange of relations with other people are defined by money. And so money is so essential that we reverse engineer and we think of this story to try and explain why money has this power over us. It's incredible.
There's an obvious reason, if you think about it, there's an obvious problem with the story, why it wouldn't happen, which is, you're taking a Neolithic village. You're a bunch of people who are neighbors, and you are assuming that they will only deal with each other with what economists like to call the spot trade. Here, I'm going to give you this, you're going to give me that, we walk away. But of course, why would they do that, right? I mean, they're neighbors. If the guy doesn't want my chickens, he knows I'm going to have something he wants because I'm his neighbor. In fact, it's rather nice to have your neighbor in your debt. It's useful for all sorts of things. So, even if you take this imaginary scenario here, these two guys in a Neolithic village, one wants a cow, what would really happen? All right, here you have the situation. So I want a cow. I go up, I say, wow, that is one magnificent cow. It's a really beautiful cow you got there. So the guy, there's only one thing he can do. He says, oh, you want the cow? Well, oh no, please take the cow. It's a really stupid cow, but if you like it, you should really have it. No, don't even think about giving me anything back. It's a gift, of course. We were neighbors. We love each other. Just take the cow. Now, he owes you one. And everybody knows that. Nobody will say it. But what does he owe? He owes you something roughly like a cow. And that's what you get in communities like this. You get this sort of rank system of types of things. So a cow, a canoe, a very nice necklace are roughly the same. You could give one back for the other. Or, it's not necessarily that, because you could give something back to him, or he could just show up because, you owe him one, and he could just say, well, wow, that's a beautiful necklace you have. Or you could say, my son is deeply in love with your daughter. It could be a lot of things. It isn't necessarily a material good. I really need help for something. So, but you have this sort of quantified rank system. And, there's all sorts of ways you can head it off. You can play games. You could, say, oh, I hate owing that guy a cow. I know, I just got a whole bunch of yams. I'll give them to him. I'll be off the hook. And, he'll be like, oh, yams, great, thanks. So he might mock you as a cheapskate, which is a devastating thing in a small community. But here's the thing. He's very unlikely to come up with a mathematical formula for exactly how cheap he thinks you were. Right? And that's the problem. How do you get from a cow is roughly like this to 27 yams equals one cow, but not three? How many chickens equals a cow? In the barter story, there's a mechanism, but if there's this sort of rough credit system is what you'd actually have and what you actually do observe in places about money, well, how does that turn into something where you can figure out exact proportional equivalence? The answer to that seems to be when somebody's very angry. When people are being nice to each other, there's really no need to calculate, but occasionally it will happen that people, violence ensues. Say I am mocking someone for giving me these yams, and he's drunk, I'm drunk, violence ensues, somebody's ear gets cut off. Well, then there's numbers. Very often it is the case that even in places where you don't have markets for goods, you do have incredibly elaborate series of fines and penalties for damaged limbs. If you lose a finger, it's worth this much. If you lose a thumb, it's worth that much. If you lose an eye, if you have a gash like this large, and we'll measure the gash and how many chickens or heifers or silver plates or whatever it might be. What they call the barbarian law codes. It seemed like every society in early medieval Europe wrote up a schedule of fines like this, and some of them are incredibly detailed. The early Welsh.
This is an interesting theory too. Do you reckon? How in happy times things are based on credit, and when things go down south in terms of human relations, social relations, that's when you get the measuring stick out, and you start fining and penalizing people as a result of acts of violence.
And Irish ones are especially interesting because we know they didn't have markets. You couldn't buy or sell things, most things, but they did have prices on everything. In fact, they specify the exact value of every single object likely to be found in a person's house, ranging from the silverware to the roof beams, everything, the curtains. Why? Because you will end up in a situation often where the law says you owe me 27 heifers, or this means war. Swords are pulled. People are not willing to compromise. You killed my brothers. You insulted my mother, whatever it might be. You need to pay penalties, and you don't have heifers. Well, then you actually need to figure out exactly what's equivalent to what. So in those circumstances, in legal situations, particularly where there's a danger of a feud or outbreak of violence, in fact, people do need to quantify. And it seems like that's the first circumstance where you have something like money emerging. that association then of money and violence is a constant. And looking at the history of money itself, remember,
That's a very important point too. So like in terms of like the actual derivation of money, not money in an exchange society where, you know, we're in a more complex arrangement now, with very intricate social relations, which means we are all dependent on society at large in order to reproduce ourselves. But in societies where reproduction of society is already taking place outside, why does money evolve? And it seems to be that money evolves like socially within communities as a result of resolving issues in relation to violence and quantifying revenge, basically, which is a very human and social relation type of issue to have to deal with. But like violence, interesting. When it comes down to quantifying things, you really want to quantify and very much specify your impact on other people violently. It's one thing that you want to quantify properly, and make sure everyone is getting an equal measure. Interesting.
we have this paradigm. First there is barter, then there's money, then comes credit, and that's wrong. Not only is it wrong, it's actually backwards. Credit comes first. Somehow or other, by the time the sort of curtain comes up around 3500 BC, in Mesopotamia, you already have very elaborate credit systems. Actually, the very first document we have, which talks about interest rates, is a political document by a king, Temna, I believe is his name, a Sumerian king, who's complaining about his neighbors like occupying a stretch of territory which is rightfully his. And he says, well, you know, they've been occupying this land for 20 years. If we calculate the rent we would have charged them had they been renting the same land, and then add a compounded interest rate, I calculate that they would actually owe us, 13 trillion shekels, or whatever, some insanely sum that no one could possibly pay. Obviously, this means war. So, you've already got compounded interest rates and so forth going on in the very, very first records that we have. People have expense accounts, bar tabs. It seems like almost all everyday transactions are on credit. And the evidence for that is scales, because they were denominating debts in silver, but they didn't actually make scales accurate enough to weigh out the tiny amounts of silver that would have been required to buy like a shirt or a hammer or something like that in the marketplace. They had the technology to do so. They just didn't bother. So clearly people weren't actually using silver to buy this stuff. They were running off a tab. All right, so you've got this Sumerian situation. But the same king, you know what he does after he declares war on Lagash, or the rival place, wins. And what does he do after that? He declares a debt cancellation. Because it seems, for everybody in the kingdom, because it seems that the problem you have these credit systems, money is basically in a set of IOUs denominated in silver, although silver, unless you're merchants dealing with large transactions, rarely actually changes hands. The problem is in bad years, people fall into debt. Because also these silver and grain are fixed in relation to each other. That's what money actually is, but that's a big problem. If if there's a bad harvest, the price doesn't go up. You're stuck. The farmers fall terribly into debt. As a result, people start taking away their flocks, taking away their fields, taking away members of their family. Debt peonage becomes a huge phenomena. They start running away, joining nomad bands outside the city. Society seems to be breaking down. So kings will normally come in and sort of declare a clean slate. All right, commercial debts can stay on the books usually, but consumer debt will wipe them out and start over again. This becomes a habit and becomes systematized in the biblical Jubilee every 7 to 49 years, depending on your reading. Debts are wiped out, everybody gets to go home. In fact, the first recorded word for freedom.
Isn't that interesting as well? How like money, as we know it, really gets its grounding from the idea of debt. And debt comes from a relation between people and the state. So the state kind of denominates what type of value is required to be produced. So in this case, it's wheat he's talking about, and you can measure wheat in terms of silver. And like if there's a bad harvest or something happens and people don't produce enough wheat, they go into debt to whoever it is, the state or one another. And it's these consumer debts that start to really bank up and go out of control because of these credit relations, because of these, I guess, primitive money relations that you would say, these accounting relations. And like when people go into debt, they basically fall into slavery in these times. And, you know, the only way to really rectify this situation, this form of slavery, where people end up, because they can't pay their debts, they are being controlled by other people, like entirely. The only way to resolve that is to just wipe out debts. I mean, like, isn't it interesting that we're at a point in history now where people are so consumed by credit and the debt traps that it creates, that like we've never been this indebted in the modern age ever before, like ever, like conceivably as individuals or as nations, but specifically as consumers. And so like me and 4IS discussed this at length, but I do see a necessary requirement, as in having some form of debt jubilee, as he talks about it. He talks about credit systems without money so complex and so kind of systematized by years of experimentation that every 7 to 49 years you basically just wipe the debt clean anyway. So the real question is, after like, you know, the Bretton Woods system came in and out of existence, after World War II, after the global economy kind of grew fat and prosperous, after being kind of delineated and controlled by the US dollar, in the wake of all of that, because like you can see that happening now, where like other countries are starting to trade in their own currencies and leaving the US dollar behind, in a world that is kind of debt trapped by the US dollar and US currency as this main measuring tool, where everybody keeps their kind of reserves in US dollars, where everything is denominated in US dollars. Like in a post US dollar world, do we basically wipe the slates clean of everybody's debt in US dollars? Do we do one of these jubilees that he is talking about so people can be released from their debt traps and go back to actually servicing their own countries, their own communities, their own personal and individual needs and desires? I think it's an interesting question, but like it's an interesting question in the sense that like credit is a problem, debt is a problem, and like in systems that developed complex credit and debt arrangements, they suffer the same issues that we are suffering today when it comes to credit and debt. Like when we're talking about a nation having a certain debt, individual consumers having debt, we're not talking about money here. It's not like people owe certain amounts of money, like physical cash. They owe debts to institutions like banks. They owe debts to institutions like corporations, and other institutions. And like that is speculative money. That is not real money. It's just an idea that this amount is owed to this person, and that idea can be eradicated like that. Like literally can be eradicated tomorrow, and that would revamp the entire world economy. It would change things instantaneously. But like, you know, that seems like a bit of a pipe dream, but like it's not unusual if you think of the history of money. So like I'm going to leave it there for today. I think this has been a very interesting exploration of why it is that money has such social power in today's world. And like it really comes down to the fact that we live in an exchange society. It's a society, bourgeois society. The capitalist mode of production is predicated on the idea that humans, or the people that partake in that system, exchange things with one another, whether it is actual commodities like physical commodities that are produced, like articles of consumption that are produced outside of one's own, or it's someone's labor. So it's like, your commodity for sale, if you work for someone else, is your labor. That's a commodity. And like, we all exist in this society that is built around these exchange relations, and because of the complexity and the infinite almost amount of those potential relations and those exchange relations, there's only one way to systematically cover all of those relations and allow there to be some mediation between all of those varied relations, and that's the money form. Money allows there to be a median of exchange and a measure of value, and thus it acts itself as something that sits outside of these exchange relations. And so because it sits outside of these exchange relations, while also being necessary and incredibly crucial to them, fundamental to them, it sits outside them, it can be accumulated. And if it can be accumulated and reserved or hoarded en masse, you can use it to kind of influence all of the various exchanges, so the social relations that make up that society, and give that society its power. And so that's the derivation of money power, and that's why money has such power in our society today. And so like, I think we've unpacked that, but like, I'm not finished with this idea. I'm not 100% convinced with this yet. I think there is more to explore onto exactly why power is derived from money and exchange value. But we'll leave that for another stream. Thank you very much for everyone who's contributed. Squeeb4AS, thank you very much for making yourself known in the chat and interacting. For anyone else who's been listening to this, hasn't had the chance to interact, thank you for logging in, and I hope you've enjoyed the stream. Tomorrow I'll be doing another live stream. I'll be going on Twitch, and we'll tackle another topic over in the Twitch realm. And then we'll come back and finish up the week on YouTube on Friday. So yeah, come across and enjoy Tuesday and Thursday's live streams on Twitch, and then, like I said, we'll finish up with a live stream on YouTube on Friday. So thank you very much for everyone who's watched. If you're new to this, please like, subscribe for more, and until next time, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery. See you next time. Thank you.